Well, I got a lot of stuff I want to say. Good evening. Before I get started, I'm just curious. I guess you wouldn't be here if you didn't think you needed to learn something about doing backups. But how many of you think you've got a pretty good backup system right now? I was going to see a show of hands. Okay, well, we'll see if you still feel that way. All right, we'll see. All right, well, before we get into that, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to go over, kind of administratively or whatever. What I've got lined up for the rest of this season, I guess, from now until May, is a series of topics, and it's kind of a topic within a topic here. So obviously tonight we're talking about backing up your data, but what I've kind of layered in between there in October and December and February and April is a series of things that are really tied around the concept of organizing and archiving your data. And so we're going to kind of dive deeply into that and talk about what's involved in those things. And I spaced them out that way intentionally because my hope and my desire is that you're all going to want to apply some of what we talk about to your own files and try to get yourselves, maybe a little more organized than you are. So I wanted to give you kind of, a couple of months in between each presentation to kind of work through it, come back in the intervening meetings, ask questions, learn from it, and hopefully by the end of the year, by next May, be a little better organized in having your file system and all of your files, ready to archive or already archived, so that it's a lot more than just the backups. I mean, backups is an important component of it. Archiving is many things beyond that. So anyway, that's what we're going to be doing throughout the year, and then we'll finish up in May talking about something known as digital afterlife, and that's the concept of, well, what happens to the files when I'm not around anymore? What happens to your Facebook stuff, and what happens to your Dropbox files, and those kinds of things. And that's, it's kind of a grim thing to think about, but it's an important thing, because if we're doing what we're doing as genealogists, getting all these files and organizing all this information, we do want to make sure something happens to them in the future, right? We don't want just that all to go away when we do. So anyway, this year we kind of have a plan, we kind of have an organization, and these are the things we're going to be talking about. And I'm also really going to do my best to record all of these and put every presentation online so that you can go back and review it if you want to. But more importantly, for people who are not able to make it here physically, you can also have access to the files or to the recordings and have the same benefit that you're having here. So I'm going to make a PDF version of the presentation available before the session. So those of you that have laptops and things, if you want to, in the future, if you just want to download that PDF and maybe have some things that are a little bit easier to read than this one, you can. I mentioned I'm going to record them. I'm going to make the videos available as soon as I can. I'm also going to play with the idea of making a podcast. Again, just another way of making this a little more accessible. A podcast is just the audio piece of it, and I want to learn how to do that, so I think that's just a good challenge for it. But I'd also like to encourage all of you to consider making better utilization of the blog that the DGS has. Hopefully you're aware that we have one. It's a component off from our website. And again, what I would like to do is to have this be kind of a vehicle for us to talk to each other in between the meetings, ask questions of each other, help each other out, and kind of extend the conversation that we're having, before the meeting and after the meeting. And so, in fact, that happened. I had already put this article out here about this session tonight, backing up your data, and last night Susan went out there and posted a question about it. All she did is she went down on the blog and just clicked on this leave a comment link, and it prompted her for her email and her name and allowed her to ask some questions about this presentation, some things that she would like to make sure we got addressed about some security. Apparently she's got some pictures of herself online she's concerned about. Oh, those are not of you, okay, but she has some really pertinent questions because it's been in the news about some of this hacking and some things, and so she said, well, are you going to address security? And as I responded back to her, yes, I was, and especially thanks for asking. It improved the presentation. So, this is a place where, again, kind of in between the meetings, we can all talk to each other, learn from each other, see what other people are saying, and if you know something, pop in there and answer a question for them. So I would really strongly encourage you throughout this year to please join the conversation, and don't be afraid to get out there and give the blog a try. You can get to it directly from the DGS website, just clicking on that blog link there, and that's the direct URL as well. So just kind of a bit of encouragement to please, and it will help, especially the people that are not able to come to these meetings every month. The questions that you ask and the comments that you make will help those that are viewing this stuff remotely and make this all hopefully a little more meaningful for them. So I'm going to hit the lights here. Hold on a second. Is that too dark for you? That's fine. Okay. All right. All right, so the topic we're going to be discussing at length tonight is backing up your data. And I just want to make sure we're on the same page about what I mean by backups. So by backups, I mean making a copy of your data so that if something happens to your files, if it gets lost or corrupted or deleted or something, you can restore it very quickly. There's a closely related topic called file sharing. And with this, it's kind of the same thing, but it's not. In file sharing, you're intentionally putting your files out someplace so that maybe a cousin or a coworker or somebody can have access to your file. It's a good way to exchange information. Technically, it's not really backups, and so we're really not going to be talking much about file sharing at all in this presentation. We're just going to be focusing in on the many things that are involved in making backups, because I'll be honest with you, I had a hard time organizing this because there is so much to know and so many things you can consider that it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I'm going to do my best, since I've kind of digested it for you a bit, to kind of break it up and present it in bite-sized pieces. And your backup strategy, how comfortable you feel with what you're doing and how you're doing it is going to be driven pretty much by what you have to lose. So, if you have data that can't be replaced quickly or duplicated or, somehow gotten from another source, if something really bad happens to your system, you need to have some kind of a good backup strategy in place to make sure that a bad day doesn't just wipe out, everything you've accumulated over the last 10 or 20 years. So, part of this is going to be driven just by how valuable do you feel your information is? How important is it to you that you don't lose it? So the elements of a good, in air quotes here, a good backup strategy is that you have something where your files are saved with a minimum amount of effort on your part. You want this to be very easy and as automated as you can possibly make it, because if it isn't, it's very likely we're all going to fall into bad habits and not do it. You want to make sure that you have some copies of your files on site in your house or wherever you're working, because that's, if you need them quickly, that's a good place to get them. But a good backup strategy also involves having some files off-site someplace. If something happens to your house, you have a fire or a flood or something like that, if your PC and all your backups are in your study and the study isn't there anymore, you haven't accomplished much. You need to back up as often as necessary. And if you're only in there and working on your system only occasionally, maybe making a backup once a month is perfect for you. If you're in there working on it every day, once a month isn't going to be often enough. So you just, depends on, again, what you're doing and how you're doing it. It's going to drive how often you want to do it. And you want to use reusable media, because you don't want to be buying expensive media and then throwing it away every time you make a backup. But even the reusable media that you're using may occasionally need to be replaced. I mean, stuff does wear out. But hopefully if you have a good strategy and you have lots of copies, that isn't going to affect you negatively. So the goal here is that you really want to have multiple copies in several locations, so that if anything happens to any one copy or one location, all is not lost. Setting up a good backup strategy, though, involves some resources. There's basically about 3 components or 3 types of resources you're going to have to spend to implement a good backup strategy. They're going to involve, to one degree or another, time, money, or your technical know-how. And so those are kind of the 3 variables that you have to weigh and say, well, how much time do I have? How much money do I want to spend? How smart am I about this stuff? Because those things are all going to influence what you do and how you do it. So some things that you ought to be considering is, how much data do you have? Again, how often do you want to back stuff up? How often does it change? Are you talking about just yourself? Do you have a computer you're sharing with somebody else, some other family members? Do you have multiple operating systems? Do you have Macintosh and Windows? I know they don't mix real well, but there are strange houses. Do you have different devices? I have a laptop and a desktop system, so I need to be considering what's happening there. Even your iDevices, your iPhones, your iPads. Increasingly, we have a lot of things on these portable devices, a lot of pictures. How traumatic would it be if you lost your phone and lost all your pictures? So you might want to consider backing up even your iPhone or your iPad as part of your backup strategy. And of course, there's a question of, do you want to do it fee or free? Do you want to roll it all on your own and spend no money, or are you willing to spend a little bit of money to make life easier or make it even better? And then the last thing to consider too is how quickly you would need to recover from a problem. So if I'm a business and I'm doing, say, genealogy professionally, or I'm doing something where I couldn't stand to have a week between the loss of my system and when I finally got the systems recovered, you might want to do things a bit differently. If you need to have something so that you can be back on the air very quickly, that's going to drive you in a different direction than if you can say, well, okay, like a week is reasonable, I can do that. So these are all things that you kind of have to consider when you're saying, well, how do I want to back up my data? How important is it? What do I want to choose, and how do I want to go about doing it? So we're going to talk first of all about the methodologies. There's about 3 different ways that you can approach doing this: manually, using some native things in your operating system, in your native Windows or your Apple device, or a commercial cloud-based service. And we're going to go back over these in some detail. We're also going to look at the choice of media. You have a lot of media choices available to you now. There's a lot of different things that you can store your data on. So you can use, your PC's hard disk. You can use flash drives, DVDs or Blu-rays, these USB connected devices. You can even mount extra hard drives. You can do these network attached servers, cloud-based. I mean, these are all the choices you have, and some or all of them may be right for you. Again, it just kind of depends on you and what your circumstances are. So let's start with the methodologies. At its core, there's only about 3 different ways that you can really create backups. So the first one is a manual process. So this would just be where you would occasionally take the files that you value and make copies of them on some type of a media. Well, we'll talk about the type of media more in a minute. And then preferably you would be taking some of the copies of these and getting them out of your house, your safe deposit box. Sometimes people will exchange backup copies with friends or relatives, but something to get that off-site component going, so you have copies at home and copies someplace not home, so that you don't get bit by something destroying your house. Now this is kind of a high time-consuming thing because it's up to you to remember to do it. It's a low cost. I mean, you can do this fairly cheaply with some of the cheap media. It doesn't take a lot of skill, but my opinion of this is that this is really a high-risk approach. The problem with this is that we all fall into sloppy habits, or you're out of town, or just pressed for time, and you just kind of forget to do it. And because you're doing it manually, you might miss something, and then boom, you're going to have a file corrupted, and you're going to, oh no, I forgot to back that up. And so, while this is certainly an option, and if it's a viable option, but it's not one, because as you're going to see later on, there's a lot of options and a lot of technology available to us now at I think is a pretty affordable cost. And so for probably not much more money, maybe even about as much money as you would do doing it manually, there's going to be some other options that you can choose that I think are going to give you a better solution. So while this is one of the possibilities, it's not one that I really endorse or recommend very highly. You can bump it up a bit by using what I call kind of the native solution, or the operating system solution. So with Windows comes with a backup utility. With Apple, it comes with Time Machine, and both of these are very good, very functional backups, backup tools that you can use with a variety of media choices, and you can schedule backups. So you can just set this up to say, okay, 10 p.m. every Saturday night, or the first Monday of the month, or whatever, go out there, system, just make a backup for me and write it to someplace. And again, we'll talk about where later. So with Windows, you can utilize the native tool. Now with Windows 7, one thing I learned when I bought mine, I didn't buy the Pro version, or a little more cash, and I didn't really think I needed it. Well, I found out one of the things that the basic Windows 7 version doesn't let you do is use an external drive, a network attached drive. So that kind of bit me, but I got a solution around that. I'm not sure about Windows 8, how they've done that. But even so, Windows 7, I can still schedule backups a lot of other ways. And that's a good thing. Scheduling it makes it happen automatically. You don't have to kick it off. It just happens whether you're there or not. Now, the thing to remember about these backup tools is that they're backing up the files you create. So things that you've created with a word processor, your genealogy files, pictures you've taken, things like that, and even your email and your calendar stuff. It is not going to back up the system files, so things that were on the computer when you bought it and it was delivered from Dell, or when you picked it up at the store, what have you. The assumption here is that if your system totally craters and you have to restore it, you'll have some kind of restore disk that will take that system and allow you to replace the hard drive, use this restoration thing, and bring the system kind of back to the factory default, how it was when you got it new. And that's when you go to your backup files that you've created using your Windows backup tool and restore all of the things you've created, all of your files. So that just makes it a little bit easier for the backup software, and it makes the amount of stuff you're storing a little bit smaller, so that kind of cuts down on your storage needs a bit. Apple's Time Machine does almost an identical thing. Being a Macintosh, it's a little bit better. It supports network drives a little bit better than some of the Windows versions do. But essentially, it's the same thing. It is software that you can schedule backups and not have to be there, and it will do it for you, and a really good thing for you to do. Now, you can also buy some third-party software that does similar things plus a few additional ones. So one of the things that you can do with some of these third-party softwares is you can create a clone of your hard disk. By that, it is just an exact copy of it. Again, this takes a little bit of hardware know-how to have the drive available. The advantage of doing this would be if you're in a situation where you need to have your system back up very quickly if something really bad happens and your disk crashes, you can just basically take that out and throw it away, take this clone you've made with the third-party software, put it in its place, turn your machine back on, and you're done. And so your restoration with this is much more rapid, potentially, than some of the other tools. You know, there's a little bit of complexity to this. Again, you have to have some knowledge of the hardware and how to specifically go about doing this. But if your needs are that you have to have your system come up very quickly in the event of a loss, this might be something you might want to consider. I don't personally use these tools, but two that I read about that are good are something called Nova Backup for Windows. It got very good ratings in the services I looked at. And for the Mac world, something called Carbon Copy Cloner. Apparently all the pros use that. So those are a couple of things, and the URLs right there you can go look up if you're interested in kind of kicking it up a notch and having some more capabilities than Time Machine or the Windows Backup do. You can start looking at these and maybe consider some third-party options. So, this approach, I rate this a lot better than doing it manually. Time-wise, it doesn't really take much once you've set it up. There's really no additional cost because, as long as you're using the native tools that come from Microsoft or from Apple, it comes with the software. It doesn't take a lot of skill. You just have to go in and set it up and make sure it's happening. And so, therefore, I like this a lot because the risk is low. Although, again, by itself, this is not necessarily giving you an off-site solution. This is probably still making copies, right next to your system. So we still need to address that. But I like this a whole lot better than just scheduling and doing things manually. The third alternative you have is some kind of a commercial cloud-based service, and there's lots of companies that would love to do this for you. So I've listed a few of them here. So Backblaze, Bitcasa, Carbonite, CrashPlan, Mozy. These are some names you probably recognize. There's a good article that I found through Dick Eastman. I've been kind of haunting his stuff and watching some of the articles he's written. There's one of the that may not be his, but there's 38 online backup services reviewed. And I've got the links at the end of the presentation, so you can just go to the URL. But this thing does a good job of talking about all these services and kind of emphasizing their strengths and their weaknesses. So if you're going to go this route, some of the things that you need to consider are the cost. It is going to cost you money, and the average for these things seems to be around $60 a year. You may also want to think about the time that it takes to create the initial archive. With my system and the amount of files I had, it took me nearly 3 weeks with Carbonite for it to do the initial upload of all of my files and get them all on the network. I've since learned Carbonite kind of throttles your uploads. It gets so far into it, and it says, oh, you got a lot of stuff, and it really slows you down, and they really delay the amount of time it takes for your initial backup to complete. And that's one of the digs I've heard about Carbonite. Some of these companies do a better job of supporting second local drives. So if you have a second internal drive or if you have an external drive of some kind, some of the services will charge you extra if you want to back the files up on that second drive. Some of them will include it at no cost. So that would certainly drive which way you go. And another thing to think about too, part of the reason you're doing this is because if I ever have a loss, I want to be able to recover all of my files. Most of them have web interfaces. So, if you just ding one file or one directory, it's real easy to go out there and get it and pull a copy down again, and that goes fairly quickly. But if it's your whole system, and if it took you 3 weeks to upload it, how long is it going to take you to download it again after you've got your system put back together again? It might take you a very long time. Now, some of these services will offer a variety of alternatives to that. They'll perhaps make some DVDs or Blu-ray discs for you and ship you those overnight. Some companies will actually give you a little USB drive. They'll sell it to you. So they'll copy all of your files onto that, overnight ship that to you, and then you can have a much more expeditious recovery as well. So, again, when you're looking at services and thinking about which one you might want to go with, think about if you really have to use them and who serves this stuff a little bit better. as was pointed out in, Susan pointed out in the blog earlier today, security is a concern as well. Now, most of these services all say that they do a good job of, encrypting your files and protecting them and all that stuff. But as we've learned from the news, people can hack in. It's not that hard to do if you're not smart. So some of the services will offer the ability for you to specify an extra encryption key. What this does is it really scrambles the files, and without the knowledge of that key, nobody is going to be able to read them, not even the NSA. Well, I don't think the NSA could. They'd have to spend a lot of time and effort to do it. The only risk there is if you lose the key, you can't read them either. So just if you go that route, just be very careful. This also affects some of the services one of the benefits that some of these have is, hey, you upload your file and you can share it across multiple devices and access it from anywhere. Some of them, if you opt to go with this encryption key, that's all off the table. It's just basically this system is backed up there, and that's the only system that can read them and the only thing that you can do with them. So again, that's just some considerations for how important it is to you to be able to have that level of security. So the thing I like about the cloud-based stuff is, it's a low effort on your part. Once you load the software and get it set it up, it's brainless. You create a file, it'll back it up. You change a file, it'll make a copy for you. There is the fact that you're going to have to spend some money for it, so it does cost you a little bit, but it certainly addresses the off-site requirement of what I think a good plan has to have. And so this is my opinion. I don't think you can afford not to have a service like this. The cost is really low enough now that I would just strongly encourage you all to strongly consider subscribing to one of these services, just to have the peace of mind of knowing that you have somebody and something like this working on your behalf to back up your files for you. It really is, I love the fact that it's as easy as it is. For me, I love the fact that I can access the files that are backed up from my PC anywhere in the world. I can go to a web browser, log in, and have access to those files from any browser anywhere in the world. And that gives me a nice degree of freedom, and I really enjoy being able to do that, plus knowing that they are backed up.